Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's a really exciting one. We're going to take this stack of your fascinating sources. You've got case notes, ancestry details, timelines, summaries, and really unlock the key insights they hold about your family's history. We're focusing specifically around your paternal grandmother, Josephine Eva Newlin.
Yeah, it's definitely a deep dive. The material here is complex, incredibly rich, and what really jumps out right away is how this research shows these two uh, very distinct, very powerful ancestral lines converging in your family tree.
Absolutely. So on one side, we've got a lineage that's deeply tied into African American and Native American history, specifically Cherokee history. And this includes experiences like enslavement by Cherokees, which is a crucial part of this story, and then navigating that really challenging process of tribal enrollment. We're talking late 19th, early 20th century.
Right. And then on the other side, there's this whole other line tracing African American ancestors who were actually free long before the Civil War, building lives, businesses, communities, migrating across the country. It's a very different kind of landscape they were navigating.
Exactly. So our goal here in this deep dive is to kind of weave these lives together, help you make sense of the individuals, the specific challenges, they faced, and also highlight those moments of resilience that just shine through in the research you've provided. So let's jump right in. We'll start with the line connecting back through Josephine Eva Newlin's mother, Henrietta Derrick. This takes us into that complex Cherokee and African American history.
Okay, let's unpack this. So Henrietta Derrick's parents were Edward Wright Derrick and Josephine Clementine Sanders. She was also known as Josie.
And Edward Wright Derrick's story, just looking at these sources, it's pretty striking from the get-go. Born around, 1852, in Indian Territory. He claimed he was enslaved before the Civil War, first by a man named Andy Griffin, and then later by Eli Wright, who the records show was a Cherokee citizen.
And that claim, being enslaved by a Cherokee citizen, that's a really key piece of this history. It's directly relevant to the whole complex post-war status of Cherokee Freedmen. And his path, trying to get official recognition with the Cherokee Nation, it was incredibly difficult. These notes make that very clear.
Yeah, in 1900, he applies for enrollment as a Cherokee Freedman. He states, both he and his mother were enslaved before the war, but that application denied.
His wife, Josie, she applies for him based on intermarriage.
Also denied.
Denied again. But what's fascinating is the persistence here. Despite all these setbacks, the case, it just dragged on for years, about 7 years, the notes say. And he actually was admitted eventually as a freedman by the commission, that's the Dawes Commission, the U.S. government body handling enrollment before allotment.
Okay, so after 7 years, some success.
But then the Cherokee Nation itself contested that decision.
Oh, wow.
And he was denied again.
So denied twice, even after being initially admitted by the commission, after 7 years fighting for it. That just really highlights the intense systemic barriers that were in place after the Civil War.
Yeah.
They were clearly trying to limit who got officially recognized as Cherokee citizen, especially the freedmen.
Exactly. And then there's that really evocative detail you mentioned from the notes. He was referred to as an intruder.
An intruder, yeah.
Yes, that term was used by the nation for people living in Indian Territory who weren't recognized citizens of one of the 5 tribes. It just shows how precarious his situation was.
And then, as you pointed out, there's that really somber detail. He dies in 1907, and the cause of death on the record is purposefully omitted.
Purposefully omitted. It's a detail that absolutely makes you pause and wonder, what were the circumstances surrounding his death?
It certainly does. Okay, now let's look at his wife, your great-grandmother, Josephine Clementine Josie Sanders, born 1865, Tahlequah, Cherokee Nation. The records describe her using different terms, sometimes mulatto, indicating mixed African-American and Native American ancestry, sometimes just Cherokee.
And her enrollment process, well, it was also challenging. She applied in 1900, same time as Edward, but she applied differently as Cherokee by blood for herself and her children. She stated her father was full-blood Cherokee and her paternal grandmother was an old settler.
Right, an old settler. That means someone from the Cherokee Nation East who moved west voluntarily before the main forced removal on the Trail of Tears. So she's claiming this deep established lineage.
Exactly. But that by-blood application?
Denied.
Denied. And instead, she was admitted, along with her children, as freedmen after a case that took about 2 years itself.
So this is a really critical point, isn't it? How identity wasn't just about your family story or how you saw yourself. It was about how the government classified you.
Precisely. And those classifications could shift or they could flat out contradict your own claims, especially in that really fraught post-war period with the Dawes enrollment.
It just underscores how much was riding on these classifications. Land rights, political standing, everything. The notes also mention Josie grew up with her grandfather, Harry Buffington, and his second wife, Dorcas. This was because her mother, Ginny, died when Josie was just a baby.
Right. And Harry Buffington, he's a really significant figure here, born around 1813 back in Cherokee Nation East. And he was born into slavery, held by a man named Charles Buffington, who is described as a half-blood Cherokee living in North Carolina.
And there's that specific detail from the sources. Harry was the only person enslaved by this particular Buffington family.
Yes, the only one. That's a powerful detail. It shows, while some Cherokees had large plantations with many enslaved people, others held just one or a few. It reveals the varied scale of enslavement within the nation.
It does. And the sources also include that testimonial from his second wife, Dorcas, where she uses that pointed historical term, describing him as a darky black Negro.
Mm-hmm. That term, it's jarring to us today, obviously, but it comes straight from the historical record. It gives us insight into the language and the racial dynamics people used back then. And Harry Buffington, he was indeed an old settler, came from the east, and likely came west on the Trail of Tears.
Wow. So born enslaved by a Cherokee, travels the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
That's incredible history right there.
It is. He migrated from North Carolina to the Beatty's Prairie area in Indian Territory near what's now Oklahoma, and then later moved to Tahlequah after the Civil War.
And he also served in the Union Army during the war.
Yes, 3rd Regiment, Indian Home Guards, Kansas Infantry. It's a remarkable life story when you piece it together.
Absolutely. Now, Josie's parents, Ginny K. Buffington and writer Jun Ka Lunt Sanders, as you said, they both died when she was very young, leaving her orphaned.
Right. And Ginny is described as Cherokee by blood, but with a colored father that's Harry and a full-blood Cherokee mother.
So Ginny's own lineage reflects that complex intersection.
Mm-hmm. And writer, Josie's father, he's described as full-blood Cherokee. His mother, Lee Raincrow, was supposedly a full-blood old settler.
Okay, so that's the basis for Josie's by-blood claim that got denied. Lee Raincrow was also from the East, possibly on the Trail of Tears, and died around 1861 during the Civil War.
The research also touches briefly on Katie Walkingstick Whitmire. Edward Wright Derrick stated she was his mother, enslaved by James Walkingstick. Her second husband might have been Moses Whitmire, who was involved in a famous Supreme Court case. But the sources note it was hard for researchers to find records for John Wright Derrick, the man Edward named as his father. So that part of his claim is difficult to verify.
Got it. So this whole side of the family, we see this clear migration pattern over time, right? From Tahlequah and Nowata in Oklahoma.
Yeah, then moving west to Portland, Oregon.
And eventually settling in Oakland, California. The notes even give a specific address for Josie in Oakland, 1672 13th Street.
And it's worth noting, tragically, several of Edward and Josie's children died young, which was unfortunately quite common back then.
Okay, so now let's shift gears. Let's explore the other side of your family tree. This traces back through Josephine Eva Newland's father, James Henry Newland. And this is the line with that history of being free long before the Civil War. It offers a really different but equally compelling look at African-American life in the 19th century.
Exactly. This is where we meet Daniel Foskin Newland and Susan Morania Bird, or Bird, sometimes spelled B-I-R-D, who were James Henry's parents. And Daniel Foskin Newland's story, it's truly remarkable. He was born enslaved in North Carolina around 1832, but his life took this really pivotal turn.
Okay.
In October 1850, he was manumitted, formally set free in Logan County, Ohio.
Manumitted in Ohio, okay.
And he wasn't freed alone. This wasn't just him. This event involved the manumission of 41 enslaved people all at once.
41 people. Wow. How did that happen?
Through the will of a woman named Sarah Freeman. She had given these individuals to a man named John Newland, specifically for the purpose of freeing them. The sources even suggest she might have purchased people specifically to free them.
That's incredible. An incredible act. And that scale of manumission, 41 people.
It absolutely is. Now, Daniel's identity in the records, it kind of reflects the complexity of racial descriptions back then, sometimes listed as mulatto, sometimes as black. But he was clearly a man of skill, of enterprise. He worked as a gunsmith and a blacksmith, and he owned his own shop.
Owning your own business, especially a skilled trade like that, as a black man in the mid-19th century, that was a huge achievement.
Definitely. And he was deeply involved in his community, too. Elected trustee of Parkerville ME Church, affiliations with the AME Church, the Council Grove Masonic Lodge.
So a real community leader.
Seems like it. And he even had an inventive streak. He manufactured and sold his own Eureka patent churn.
Huh. A patent churn. That's fantastic, isn't it? But, his life wasn't without some really severe challenges. The sources include these vivid, kind of disturbing details. There was a sheriff's sale of his property in 1891. Likely a forced sale, maybe debt, or some other economic hardship.
Okay, that's tough.
And in the same year, 1891, there's this alarming note that he was violently thrown to ground by crowd.
Whoa. Violently thrown to the ground by a crowd and a sheriff's sale in the same year.
Yeah.
That's a stark reminder, isn't it? That even for successful, free Black individuals, economic stability, even personal safety, we're always vulnerable, always precarious, subject to racial hostility, even outside the South.
Exactly right. His migration path shows that search for opportunity and stability, it was extensive. From North Carolina, where he was born enslaved.
To Ohio, where he was freed.
Then to Kansas, spent significant time there. Or briefly to Stillwater, Oklahoma, then back to Kansas, settling in Emporia.
Quite a journey. And his wife, Susan Marania Bird, or Bird. Yes, Susan Marania Bird, or Bird. She was born free in North Carolina. Her parents were David Bird, or Bird, and Mary, who is known as Aunt Polly. Susan migrated with her parents from North Carolina to Urbana, Ohio, and she resided with Daniel, throughout their time in Ohio and then in Kansas.
Okay. And her father, David Bird.
He's consistently described in the records as free-colored. He was also born free, and there's an interesting detail here. After his father, Jesse Bird, died while David and his siblings were still minors, they were put under the guardianship of other free-colored men.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Drury Walden became guardian for David, James Grant for his sister Angelina, and James C. Harrison for his brother Edmund.
That's a really insightful detail. It shows those structures of community support, doesn't it? Mutual aid that existed among free Black families, stepping in to care for orphaned kids, manage their affairs.
It really does. The sources also note David lived near a Peter Bird in Urbana, Ohio. Might suggest a family connection, maybe a cousin perhaps. And it highlights how these free Black families often migrated and settled together, forming these networks away from the South.
Right. And David's father, Jesse Bird, he traces this free lineage back even further.
Yes. He was documented as free-colored by at least the 1810 census back in North Carolina. His death before June 1816 is what led to that guardianship situation for his minor children, including David.
So in your family, you have documented freedom in this line going back generations before the Civil War.
Which is a really powerful legacy in itself, quite different from the experience of enslavement and that fight for post-war rights we saw on the other side of the family.
Definitely different path. So bringing it back to Josephine Evelyn Newland's father, James Henry Newland Daniel, and Susan's son.
Right. We see him carrying forward that family tradition. He was also a blacksmith, owned his own shop.
And he got a pretty notable government appointment in 1898. Superintendent of Government Blacksmithing in the Indian Territory, earned $60 a month, which wasn't insignificant then.
No, it shows the continued demand for those skilled trades and the opportunities that were available in the territory, even as it was transitioning towards statehood.
And like his father, he migrated, first with his parents to Kansas, then he moved to Oklahoma himself, living in Indian Territory, specifically Cherokee Nation.
And his personal life, well, it included his marriage to Henrietta Derrick.
Right. The link. The
Yeah.
person connecting these two very different family lines in your ancestry.
Exactly. And interestingly, the sources found newspaper notices from late 1917, early 1918, stating that Henrietta had quit him and that he wouldn't be responsible for any debts she incurred.
The old quit my bed and board notices.
Yeah, those were common ways to advertise separations or desertions back then. Right. And his funeral, it was held at the First Baptist Church for Colored, which highlights his continued connection to the organized Black community in that area.
Okay, so stepping back, here's where it gets really, really interesting. This deep dive, it reveals this incredible convergence, right? These two distinct yet equally powerful ancestral lines coming together in your family.
It's fascinating. On one side, you've got this history deeply shaped by enslavement within a native nation. Then that complex, frustrating, long fight for tribal recognition as freedmen, often facing systemic denial, plus migration.
And on the other side, a lineage marked by generations of documented freedom before the Civil War, skilled entrepreneurship, community leadership, but also facing significant challenges, violence, economic insecurity, while migrating across the Midwest and eventually into Indian Territory themselves.
The research that pulled all this together, it's incredibly thorough. I mean, look at the variety of records used. Dawes rolls, census records, newspapers, court records, guardianship papers, manumission documents, military records. The list goes on.
Yeah, and the sources mention these ongoing deep dive cluster studies focusing on the specific communities these families lived in, trying to understand the broader sort of socio-political realities they were navigating.
And the sources share the impact this work has had on you, describing how uncovering these histories helped you feel empowered, connected to a strong family legacy that maybe you hadn't felt quite as strongly before.
That makes sense. It's a powerful testament, isn't it, to how understanding our ancestors' specific journeys, their struggles, their resilience, can really reshape our own sense of identity, our sense of belonging.
Absolutely. It connects you not just to names on a family tree, but to the very real lived experiences of people who navigated these huge historical forces.
Yeah. So if we try to connect all these threads, think about the bigger picture. It really raises an important question, I think, something for you to consider as you carry this knowledge forward.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean to inherit a legacy that's been shaped by such different yet equally challenging and powerful experiences of freedom and belonging right here in America?
And how do these individual stories, your ancestors' stories, how do they illuminate that broader, often overlooked history of African Americans and Native Americans in the 19th and early 20th centuries? Something to really mull over.